All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking another deep dive into IEPs and specifically how we make sure they're actually working for students.
Yeah, IEPs, right. Individualized education programs.
Yeah, so I think it's something that a lot of our listeners are always looking to learn more about. And today we're going to be talking about not just how they're created, but how they're monitored and how we make sure they actually help students grow.
Yeah, and how we refine them as educators. And you know what? I think that's a really key point, right? Is that this is an ongoing process. Like sometimes we think of an IEP as like, oh, we have the IEP and it's done.
Yeah,
But really, we should be thinking of it as like a continuous improvement cycle, right?
for sure.
And so when we're talking about that continuous improvement cycle, like one of the core parts of that is really monitoring a student's progress towards their IEP goals. And that involves looking at a lot of different things. It's not just about formal assessments like standardized tests.
Mm.
It's also about informal assessments, like what are the teachers observing in the classroom? How is the student engaging on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so like we're talking basically like a constant stream of information gathering, right? So,
Absolutely.
okay, so we're gathering all this information. What happens with that information? How does it actually shape the IEP?
So all of that information we gather, it's really the fuel that drives the IEP, right? So when we look at through those formal and informal assessments, how a student is progressing towards their goals, it tells us, okay, what's working? What might need to be adjusted, or maybe we need a different approach altogether.
Okay.
And so interpreting this data, it's not just about looking at the numbers, it's really about understanding how a student learns uniquely, what are their ongoing
Right,
needs.
so it's about really understanding that student's journey and where they are and where they need to go. And if the data suggests that we need to make a change, then we actually have to go and make that change.
Exactly. We have to update the IEP, and that has to be done ethically, according to certain guidelines, both legal and policy guidelines, to make sure that the IEP remains relevant, that it's actually beneficial for the student.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're keeping the focus on the individual student and making sure that IEP is serving their needs. Now, it strikes me that in all of this, educators themselves must be on a continuous learning curve too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the effectiveness of any IEP really hinges on the skills of the educators who are involved,
Yep.
right? And that's why professional growth is so important.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what does that look like for educators?
Yeah, so educators, they're actively setting their own learning goals.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So they're thinking about, okay, what are the areas where I need to grow? Where do I need to get better to serve my students?
Oh, that's interesting. So just like the students have learning objectives, the educators do as well.
Exactly. And they're actively pursuing opportunities to expand their knowledge, to refine their techniques. This isn't just about checking off boxes. This is about a real commitment to getting better at supporting their students.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
so what are some of the ways they can do that?
Yeah, so they might collaborate with other professionals. They might explore new research in the field of education. They might attend, specialized training, workshops, conferences.
Okay.
And the aim is always to enhance their ability to really help students achieve their full potential.
That's great. And a key part of that growth must involve looking at their own practices too, right? Really
Yeah.
analyzing what they're doing in the classroom.
Oh, self-reflection is huge. Educators need to regularly think critically about their teaching methods. What's working well, what are the areas that they could improve upon. And this process of self-assessment, it really informs those professional learning goals that we talked about.
Okay.
It helps them come up with, okay, what are the strategies? Like, how am I going to achieve these goals that I've set for myself?
So it's all connected. So we're constantly checking in on the student, using that information to shape the IEP. But at the same time, educators are constantly learning and refining their own skills so they can deliver that IEP even better.
That's exactly it. It's this dynamic and ongoing process. And, always with the student's individual needs at the center, right?
Right.
So it's continuous assessment, data-informed planning, ethically revising the IEP, and this dedication to professional growth on the part of the educators.
Well, that gives, I think, a really clear picture of what it takes to make IEPs truly effective. So for our listeners out there, think about how this cycle of assessment and adaptation and continuous learning, might apply in other areas where you're aiming for growth or maybe you're helping others develop. It's a fascinating model to think about. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.